Today, we are going to discuss the market structure of a monopoly. And a monopoly is something that you may have heard of as possibly being illegal in the United States. But you will discover today that monopolies really aren't illegal. It's that the abuse of monopoly power is often regulated and what might be illegal. But the existence of a monopoly is not necessarily an illegal action in the United States. So if you'll remember, we previously spoke about perfect competition market structure, the idea that this is the market structure in which you have many firms selling an identical product, that there's free entry and exit into this market structure, and that the firms are price takers. They take the price as given from the market. There is no one firm that is large enough to control the market for the product. So perfect competition is the most competition that's possible. A monopoly is the market structure with the least competition that is possible. And then in the next chapter, we'll discuss the remaining two market structures of monopolistic competition and oligopoly. So a monopoly has certain requirements for it to be a monopoly. Obviously, the first is that there is only one seller of whatever this product is. And for a monopolist to really have power, they would be producing an item for which there's really no close substitute. You would think of a product in which there's one producer manufacturing a product and there's nothing else like it. And the other key part to a monopoly market structure is that there is a barrier to entry. There is something that is keeping other firms from entering into this market and doing the thing that the monopolist is doing. And as we discuss the barriers to entry, you'll realize that these are all perfectly legal barriers to entry. So for example, you can patent a product. A patent essentially says that the owner of the patent is the only one that is allowed to earn profits and to produce that particular item. And it is up to the holder of the patent to sort of enforce that patent to make sure that nobody else is copying what it is that they're doing. But a patent essentially makes it so that nobody else can do the thing that you're doing. So for example, in our jelly and marmalade factory growing up, we created a product called Coconut Toast Spread. And Coconut Toast Spread was a product that we held the recipe for. It was patented. We actually had trademarked the name also, but we patented the recipe. And what that meant was that nobody else could produce the same item that we did. However, it was up to us to make sure that the competing firms in Florida were not doing the thing that we did. And what that meant was every summer we took road trips all around the state of Florida and pretty much visited every tacky tourist shop that we sold to, and we looked at what the competitors were selling. And one year there was a competitor which was actually selling a product, and they even called it Coconut Toast Spread. They just spelled the word spread a little bit differently than we did. But we had to take them to court in order to prove that they were producing a product that we had a patent on. My father's a food technologist, so he bought their product. He broke down the recipe. He figured out that they really had just simply replicated what we were doing and were selling it for a few dollars less than we were. But we had the patent on it, and the judge realized that this other competitor was infringing on our barrier to entry, ordered them to cease producing their version of Coconut Toast Spread. So it's perfectly legal to have a patent. You can also have a barrier to entry by simply owning the resources that are used to make whatever the product is that you're making. So for example, at one time, The diamond industry was pretty much monopolized by the De Beers Diamond Corporation. De Beers was a large mining interest in the world, and they simply owned pretty much all of the world's known diamond mines. Anytime diamonds were discovered, De Beers bought up the mine. So they owned the resources that were being used to mine the diamonds. After the fall of the Soviet Union, however, diamond mines became much more prevalent around the world. More and more were discovered, and De Beers couldn't keep up with buying them all. So they eventually lost their ownership of resources barrier to entry. And now there's multiple mining firms that own diamond mines. But you might often also realize that, for example, pharmaceutical companies are purchasing large patches of the Amazon rainforest. Why might a pharmaceutical company that manufactures medicine, why would they purchase large tracts of rainforest? Well, simply because they think that maybe the next great cure for whatever the disease is going to come from the rainforest. There's a lot of biodiversity in rainforests. And if they owned a big tract of the rainforest, they would own the resources that would possibly be used to manufacture the cure that they've discovered. You can also have what's known as a natural monopoly, and this is a monopoly in which essentially it's just cheaper to have one industry provide this product or service than it is to have competition. Some of the best examples of natural monopolies, if you think of water distribution. So for example, if you live in the city, you probably have city provided water. Your water comes from the city. In order to have competition in that market, think of what would have to happen if you wanted to come into that market and provide competing water supply. You'd have to dig up the road and lay your own pipe and then convince houses to tap into your pipe instead of the city pipe. Really doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. The telephone industry in the original days was also a natural monopoly. AT&T was the firm that laid the lines across the country. They put in the telephone poles and strung the wire. And it really didn't make sense at that time to have multiple firms laying telephone poles and wires across the country. It just sort of made sense to have one business do it. Now, they've lost their natural monopoly because of the cell phone, obviously. But a natural monopoly is a special case, and we'll talk about this in further detail in later chapters. But the key is with a monopoly that the firms are price makers. They can set the price of their product. It is perfectly possible, perfectly legal for them to do it. So ask yourself, why do monopolists always have such a bad reputation? It's often because people think they just charge really high prices. But consider this. We had a monopoly on the production of coconut toast spread, a jar of jelly. It actually was a really good type of product. If you like coconut, it has the consistency of caramel, but when you put it on toast, it melts. It makes a great base for grilled pork chops and chicken and that sort of thing, if you like coconut. But we had the monopoly on that product. So we sold it in pretty much all the tacky tourist shops of Florida. So one would say, oh, you're a monopoly, you can set the price. Well, it wouldn't make a lot of sense for us to set the price at $400 for a jar of jelly. Just because we could, because we're a monopoly, doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to set the price as high as we absolutely could, because then people won't buy the product anymore. So essentially, the monopolist is still going to maximize their profits where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So that rule still applies like it did in perfect competition. It's going to look a little bit different, however, because the monopolist is able to set the price. So, for example, George and Francine have attained a patent for their invention, an automatic soap dispenser. The demand curve is given below, and we have to determine where they're going to maximize their profits. So you'll notice that as the price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. So if they were to set the price at $30, they wouldn't sell any items. Nobody has a demand for it at $30, so the revenue would be zero. But if they set the price at $27, they would sell 1 unit, and so their revenue would be $27. If they set the price at $24, they would sell 2 units. So their revenue would be 2 times 24, which would be 48. So complete the total revenue, and then see if you can calculate marginal revenue. And you'll notice that marginal revenue does not equal the price in this case. It equals something different. Remember, marginal anything means incremental. So as you change your quantities, and in this case by 1, look at what the change in total revenue is. So I'd encourage you to pause the video and work that out. So you'll notice as they lower their price to $15, their revenue rises. They would sell 5 units at $15, $75 of revenue. But if they set the price at $12, while they sell 6 units, their revenue actually goes down. So notice the marginal revenue. Their first unit gives them a marginal revenue of $27. But then when they set the price at 24, their marginal revenue goes to $21. So 27 to 48 is a difference of 21. 48 to 63 is a difference of 15. 63 to 72 is a difference of 9. You get the picture. Now I've also given you the total cost, so you should be able to pause the video and work out the marginal cost. Remember, that's the change in total cost divided by your change in quantity. And I made it easy because the change in quantity is always 1. So as I sell my first unit, my marginal cost is $10. I go from $5 to $15. As I sell my second unit, my costs go up by $5, 15 to 20. And then you see the pattern. Marginal cost goes down and back up again, as we discovered in Chapter 7. Now, there is a point at which marginal revenue equals marginal cost. You'll notice at the quantity of 4 units, the marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So the question is, if they produce 4 units, can you figure out what price they're going to charge? So if they produce 4 units, apparently people are willing to pay $18 for those 4 units. So because they're a monopoly and they're allowed to set the price, they can make the price, they're going to make it at $18. And there will be 4 people that buy the item. And that's where they will maximize their profits. So you notice, when you look at this graph, I've graphed your marginal revenue, which is the green line. Your marginal cost is the blue line. And the demand curve is the red line. So you'll notice marginal revenue equals marginal cost at 4 units. But you go up to the demand curve to get the price. You go up to the demand curve to get the price. And actually, they make profit of $36. So do this example. The R&K Pharmaceutical Company has finally obtained approval to sell a new prescription that delivers sunblock protection in a pill. You don't have to put that oil on anymore. They've obtained a patent. That's the barrier to entry. And I've given you the demand curve as well as the cost curves. So you should be able to pause the video and work this out. So again, your revenue is just simply price times quantity, and your marginal revenue is the difference as you move from one unit to the next unit. Marginal cost is the same. As you move from one unit to the next, what's the change in cost? And you'll notice that marginal revenue equals marginal cost at 4 units. The price they're going to charge is $10. Now you'll also notice that this is at the minimum of their average total cost curve. But this firm is actually going to be making some profit. $40 of revenue minus $28 of cost gives us how much profit? So it gives us $12 of profit. Can the monopolist keep earning that profit? If you remember perfect competition, the profit disappears because more firms will enter into the market, driving the price down. But in this case, we have a monopolist that's earning a profit. Can they keep earning that profit? And they can, as long as the barrier to entry exists. Nobody else can come in and produce the thing that they're producing. Now, what if the monopolist is losing money? In this case, they can leave the business. There is no barrier to leaving the industry, except, however, one particular industry. And you probably aren't aware of this, but the United States Postal Service is actually a government-created monopoly on the delivery of first-class mail. Now, there are other ways to get letters. Obviously, you can email. There are other ways to deliver packages. But if you want to deliver a letter, you use the post office. It was created by the government. It's a quasi-governmental agency that, interestingly, is actually required to make a profit. By law, they have to earn a profit. And interestingly, they are not allowed to disappear when they're losing profit. They still have to continue to be in existence. But normally, if a monopolist is losing, they go out of business. There's one more special case of power that a monopolist might possess, and that's the idea of price discrimination. Now, price discrimination happens in many types of markets and for many types of goods, and it really can be perfectly legal. So, for example, it's perfectly legal to have a movie theater sell tickets to the movie before 6 o'clock are cheaper than after 6 o'clock. Perfectly legal. You have two different types of customers, and they can set the prices differently. The electric company charges businesses a different rate than residential addresses. So if you're a business using electricity, you get charged a different rate than if you are a homeowner using electricity. So price discrimination actually can be perfectly legal. The key is that the monopolist charges the price that people are willing to pay. And essentially, that's reflective of their elasticity of demand, which we talked about in a previous chapter. So in order to make this happen, obviously the seller has to be the one that sets the price. And somehow the seller has to be able to distinguish between the customers that are willing to pay different prices. So for example, at the movie theater, you can't go in and purchase a $5 ticket for an early show and sell it to somebody for a little bit higher price, making a profit, and possibly, letting them go in at a different time of day or even a different day. You can't buy a Tuesday ticket and then go in on Saturday to use it. So the way they distinguish between the customers, they put the time and the dates on the sticker, on the ticket. Some movie theaters will actually use different color tickets for different days and different times. And the consumers cannot engage in arbitrage. So that's that case where I buy something at a low price and then resell it at a higher price. So for example, I can't go to the airlines and purchase all the flights all the seats on a flight to Miami Beach over spring break. I can't buy them a year ahead of time at a really low price and sell them the week before spring break for all those spring break goers at a higher price. It's not legal for me to do that, and the airline industry has made it so that I can't do that because you have to put your name on the airline ticket. So let's do a little bit of comparing. George has developed a car that runs on water. That would be kind of cool. And here's the demand curve. Do this example exactly like we did the other two examples, as though George were a single price monopolist. So pause the video and make sure that you can do this. This is a single price monopolist, and you've already seen two examples. So in this case, George is going to sell 4 cars. That was a complete accident that all the examples have 4 as the output. But he will charge a price of $14, and the profit that will be earned is $38,000. So George, if he were a single price monopolist, he would sell all 4 cars at $14,000, and he would make profit of $38,000. Now, if he were a perfect price discriminating monopolist, what that means is car number 1 gets sold to the person who's willing to pay $20,000. There's somebody out there who wants that car, and they'll pay $20,000 to get it. So George sells it to him for $20,000. So his revenue would be $20,000. And his marginal revenue would also be $20,000 because he went from 0 to 20. Now, the second car, well, there's another person out there that really wants the car, but they're only willing to pay $18,000 for that car. So George says, I'll sell it to you for $18,000. So he sold the first one for $20,000 to the person who was willing to buy it at that price. He sold the second one to the person who was willing to pay $18,000 at that price. So now George has revenue of $38,000. He went from $20,000 to $38,000. His marginal revenue went up by $18,000. So essentially, George is going to sell each car to the next person in line who's willing to pay the lower prices. So car number 1 goes to the person willing to pay $20,000. Car number 2 goes to the person willing to pay $18,000. Car number 3 goes to the person willing to pay $16,000. Car number 4 goes to the person willing to pay $14,000, and on down the list. You'll notice that the marginal revenue is the price of the product. Every time they sell another unit, they're going to get whatever the price is for that product. So they're going to go from $20,000 of revenue to $38,000 of revenue. Then they're going to go from $38,000 of revenue to $54,000 of revenue, which is a difference of 16. Then they're going to go from $54,000 to $68,000, which is a difference of 14,000. So you'll notice that the marginal revenue is really just the price of the product. And then the marginal cost is the difference as you go from one unit to the next. In this case, where they're going to maximize their profit is where the marginal cost equals the price of the product. So consider this. George sells the first car at $20,000. It only costs $4,000 to make, So he made some profit by selling that first car. The second car he sells for $18,000. Well, it only added $5,000 in cost, or it only added $1,000 in cost for that second car. So might as well sell the second car and make some profit on that. The third car he'll sell for $16,000, but the third car only added $5,000 in cost. You went from $5,000 to $10,000. So you made some profit on selling car number 3. You made some profit on selling car number 4. On car number 5, he got $12,000 for that, and it added $12,000 in costs, and he only earned normal profit on car number 5. He earned economic profit on all the cars before that. Notice it doesn't make any sense to produce car number 6, because to sell that many cars, I'd have to lower the price to $10,000. But car number 6 added $16,000 in cost. So I can sell the car for $10,000, but it added $16,000 in cost. So it doesn't make any sense to sell car number 6. I'm going to stop where marginal cost equals the price of the product. So in this case, my revenue is 20 plus 18 plus 16 plus 14 plus 12. My revenue is $80,000. My cost is only $30,000, and I actually made $50,000 worth of profit. So in this case, I've actually earned more profit than if I were a single price monopolist. Essentially, a perfectly price discriminating monopolist earns the most profit that is absolutely possible. And as long as they have the barrier to entry and can price discriminate, they will continue to earn that profit. So if you look at the graph, again, you notice I have demand and marginal revenue and marginal cost. They're going to produce 5 cars. The price of those 5 cars is each going to be different. But you'll notice that 5 cars, the marginal cost intersects the demand curve. That's the quantity that will be produced by a price discriminating monopolist. The quantity that's produced is where marginal cost intersects the demand curve, where it's equal to the price. They're going to charge a different price for different customers, but they're going to stop producing when the quantity is where marginal cost intersects the demand. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that's not fair to charge people different prices. But consider this. Person number 1 was willing to pay $20,000. There's nothing wrong with charging them $20,000 if that's what they were willing to pay. Yes, they would have loved to have only paid $12,000, but they were willing to pay $20,000, so the monopolist sets the price at $20,000 for car number 1. So oftentimes we ask ourselves, should we allow a monopoly? The reality is prices do tend to be higher than if there were competition. Competition typically lowers prices, and the quantity tends to be lower than if there were competition. So typically the monopolist has higher prices and lower quantities that will be sold. They're the only ones producing this particular product or service, and as long as the barrier to entry exists, they will have that power. So these monopolists have the potential to earn higher profits than those in perfect competition. So is there any good thing that comes from having a monopoly? And this is where a lot of people say they ought to just be outlawed because they charge high prices. But consider this, without the barrier to entry, we might not really have all the inventions that we have. People invent things so that they can hopefully patent the item so that they can possibly keep earning some profits. The barrier to entry is sometimes an incentive to the invention of new things. we have to remember that though the monopolist can restrict the output and charge a higher price, they're still not going to just exorbitantly charge people out of the industry, out of the market. It would make no sense for the De Beers Diamond Company to have a diamond mine monopoly and then make people pay $500 million for their engagement rings. Please don't purchase a $500 million engagement ring, unless you have that kind of money. And if you do, just remember Dr. Garrick is your teacher. But most of my students would probably find other things to do with $500 million. The De Beers Diamond Company did not just simply charge these exorbitant prices, because people would realize they have other options. They don't have to have a diamond ring for the engagement if that were the kind of price that they were going to charge. Yes, prices were higher. And if you notice things about diamonds, the prices actually have been falling in the last 20 years or so, really since the fall of the Soviet Union. So in summary, what you've learned in this lecture has been the criteria for the monopoly market structure. So please make sure you can identify the characteristics of a monopoly in a couple of examples, as well as some mathematical and graphical examples of where the monopoly will maximize their profits. If it's a single price monopolist, they're going to maximize profits where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That determines the quantity, and they get the price from the demand curve. If it's a price discriminating monopoly, the quantity produced is going to be that point where marginal cost intersects the demand curve, where marginal cost intersects the price. But remember, really, for a price discriminating monopolist, the marginal revenue is the same thing as the price of the product. So while we've examined this market structure and contrasted it with perfect competition, we recognize that this is the market structure that has the potential to earn profits. And as long as the barrier to entry exists, they can keep earning those profits. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about monopolistic competition and oligopolies.